extent some of you are interested, I know, in community engagement, and that seems good, good public policy, but to what extent is the development of P3s really, to what extent does it contradict the rights of citizens to get involved? We have commercial confidentiality, of course, and that was one of the criticisms of the Bob Shirelli's LRT line, was that whether it was Siemens or the council here, people just didn't really, including the councils, didn't really get the full story. So, to what extent, do we see P3s as something that we could reconcile with those other demands on public services?
It's looking right at me. In terms of the, and I'm not going to speak to the LRT, obviously, in Ottawa issue, not being from Ottawa, I wasn't there. However, with the community engagement and on P3s, I mean, the community wants to have a stake. They want to know, they want to have information, they want to have access to information, and I think they want to have a conversation. And where we fall down, and I don't mean anyone in this room, of course, is by not allowing that conversation to take place in a natural state. So there is information clearly that's confidential on a P3, but in terms of looking at the proposal and the project and its impact and how it can be looked at from an innovative perspective, that's a really good conversation to have with any community. How it gets financed is, of course, part of municipal culture and needs to be addressed. And I think the community engagement, we could certainly look at how we can bring forward a stronger community engagement model to really get those projects built and dealt with that need to be dealt with. And it's how you use them with the community more of a proactive approach. And there's lots of tools and ways to do that. Lots of great representative projects in Ontario that show that. So I think including wind turbines, and solar farms, which haven't hit with the most joyful experience in many communities because of the potential impacts. But there is a lot of opportunity for good engagement around those initiatives.
So maybe I can pick up on that. And I agree. I think there's a lot of room for community engagement. And I'm relatively new to Ottawa, so I can claim some different ground and not comment on the recent experience here. But a really good P3, if it's done correctly, is centered around community engagement. And I'm going to use the wider term, which is stakeholder engagement. It's not only about engaging your community, it's about engaging the internal stakeholders within either the facility or the folks that are affected by, let's say, the LRT, using that as the example. So there are employees that are affected, management is affected, the government is affected. So you take a project, and I'm going to just step out of Boston, Ontario, and I can think of a number of different projects where we needed to engage the feds, the province, the municipalities, all the internal stakeholders, each of whom had different concerns. So senior management had different concerns than the folks who were into the maintenance of the facility. And in very large order, the success of the P3 lies with having consulted those folks. So just to draw on an example, if I may, we toured a number of facilities in England, one of the large hospitals. I was living in England at the time, and I hosted them. And we toured it after it had been planned and fixed. And so the facilities were new, they'd been running for about a year, and without fail, those that were successful were the ones where there was community engagement and where the staff and the folks that were involved felt that they had a say in what that facility would look like, how it would operate. They felt distinctly that they had bought into it, and that process was set up right at the beginning. And what it meant was, when folks showed up at the facility, they felt attached to it. And that's actually a very critical piece. I use a different project, and this one's in Ontario, which is a highly, highly visible project. And in fact, it had 3 different sites. The community and stakeholder consultation on that particular project was actually quite key to site selection. Now, I do really want to make a practical point, because the point is, you're going to get an optimal site selection. There will always be some level of disagreement. It is very difficult to meet everyone's requirement. But that said, folks still felt that the consultation was fair, it was transparent, and they were privy to the information.
Thanks. Yeah, that's it.
So I think the question was around P3 and whether it compromises the public engagement, and I'd say it's not an either-or situation. I think the use of the P3 and to link that with the level of engagement of the public is actually not appropriate, because it really isn't, shouldn't have anything to do with that. When you get into a P3, there is going to be commercially confidential things, and they will have to remain that way. I think what you do have to do in terms of managing the project, and it gets down to the communication. I think what Ottawa will be facing when we implement our LRT project, and of course we haven't decided what kind of procurement model we will go with, but if it's a P3, we will have thought through very carefully in terms of what are the things that are important from a communications perspective. It will be a large linear project, and I know that a lot of the successful P3s out there are projects that are vertical, and you can isolate, and certainly the projects that IO has been doing. So that puts it into a very unique situation, but I think the large part of it is really around the communication, which, to try and link that to the procurement model. I really don't think that that's appropriate. It's just a matter of making sure the focus is there on.
Okay, just like long.
I think there's several reasons why there's opposition to P3s, some which are easily addressed, some which are not. We just heard that it's important to have an effective communications model of this. From a citizen's point of view, I would say that's a consultation process, not a communications process. So there's one issue right there. If it's the government that has identified the need for the project and is driving the P3, citizens are probably going to be less suspicious than if a private sector party comes forward and says, we think this is a really good idea and you should go ahead with it. The question of not being able to see the commercial contracts. Of course, these contracts are commercially confidential. No one would expect to see commercial contracts under traditional procurement. So I think that's a bit of a straw herring. There was a report that was put out earlier this year by the Conference Board of Canada, and I think they had some fairly obvious truths. They said when they reviewed P3s, two key areas they identified as factors for success, and probably for the communications and buying strategies. One, you do a value for money audit first. So people know that the P3 alternative is actually cheaper than traditional procurement. And secondly, publicly tender it. If you don't do that, you're going to have problems. It's interesting, in October, the CUPE union here in town had a seminar of P3s for people who are running for municipal office. And as expected, they had 4 speakers. All the speakers were against P3s to varying degrees, but nobody liked them. I innocently, or maybe not so innocently, asked the question, I can understand why the union doesn't like P3s, but can you tell me why the pension funds of the unions are the biggest investors in P3s and the privatization of infrastructure? And they had a hard time answering that. So even those who say they are against it may see value somewhere along the line.
Okay, did you want to make one?
I will. I think Lauren covered one of the points, which is really there's a lot of commercially confidential information which is competitive amongst bidders. So you do have a need to protect the interests of those parties. That said, the execution agencies across Canada, including Partnerships BC, Infrastructure Ontario, Infrastructure Quebec, if you get on their websites, you can actually see the RFQs, the RFPs, and you can see a form of the redacted project agreements on those sites. Those project agreements are about 1,000 pages thick. We spend an awful lot of time negotiating them. One of the things we're trying to do in the sector, and there's so much transparency in the sector at this point, it was unheard of about 10 years ago. I've been working in P3s for about 13 years, just large infrastructure projects. It's really about striking a balance. I mean, someone says to me, well, will you have stakeholder engagement? Will you be transparent? It depends. You've got to take into account the specifics of the project. so I think, whether it's vertical infrastructure, whether it's linear surface transportation, we've got the Canada line, you can find that, I think, project agreement. It's redacted, of course, but it is available. And it may not fit everyone's needs. I'm not advocating by any means that P3 is the only way to go. That's important. Only 25% of projects, and probably less in Canada, are done through P3s. The rest are all done on traditional procurement.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to keep things moving along.
Just a very brief comment. I think that based on what I hear, we're talking about establishing trust in the process. That's what the citizen wants. If they're happy, if they are comfortable with the process, we have achieved it.
Okay, thanks for that.